So I now have the privilege of being able to introduce our keynote speaker, AJ Crabill. And I will say, channeling his words, that student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. This is one of his mantras, and he's explored that in his recent book, Great on Their Behalf: Why School Boards Fail and How Yours Can Become Effective. And in this book, he talks about how changing adult behaviors requires new mindsets, new knowledge, and new skills. And he really works to transform student outcomes through the transformation of those adult mindsets, knowledge, and skills, including starting with his own. AJ is conservator at the DeSoto Independent School District. And during his guidance, DeSoto improved from F ratings in academics, finance, and governance to B ratings. We would hope that success for all of our students. And he's also served in his career as deputy commissioner at the Texas Education Agency, as board chair of Kansas City Public Schools. And it's one of the things that I feel like we are working toward at SRI, is to be sure that we have real hardcore practitioners in our fold, and also those that are keen on the use of evidence. And I think that part of what has made AJ successful in these roles is that he uses evidence in prioritizing student outcomes. And because of that combination, I think that it's one of the reasons why I think he's an ideal speaker for SRI, because we use evidence and we prioritize student outcomes. So I think we're a good match. I will say in my last moment here that AJ, I think, is a notable leader and has been on an incredible personal and professional life journey that I'm excited to hear more about in his keynote reflections here on improving student outcomes, why school boards fail our most educationally vulnerable students, and what researchers, that's a lot of us, can do about it. So please join me in welcoming AJ Crabill.
Thank you so much. I spend pretty much at least half of my time each week working directly with school board members and superintendents across the nation, certainly a lot of them across Texas, where I live, but also a lot of the nation's largest urban districts through one of my other jobs as National Director of Governance for the Council of Great City Schools, essentially a member organization of the 80 largest urban serving school districts across the nation. So if you live in a large urban area, I have probably afflicted your board at some point. It is through this work that I've become completely possessed of this idea that student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. That what I want for my students, that the things that I aspire for them really emerge through my willingness to interrogate my own behavior and to make changes in it that more greatly align with my desired improvements in their outcomes. The problem is, as I reflected in my time in preparation for our visit today, is that I don't have the level of clarity around which adult behaviors need to change as I need to have. And as we'll talk about today, I think you can play a significant role in that. Time is against us, and so I'll move quickly. There are really three things I want to accomplish. I want to share a little bit about what I see the problem is, what we currently know, what we don't know, and kind of how we've gotten to where we are. Part of what I see the solution as, the role that we can play collaborating together. And then I just want to open it up for Q&A, because if you're living a good life, you probably don't interact with a lot of governance nerds. And so this is your chance. This is it. No holds barred. So I was visiting with my godson and his father. We were sitting on the couch in their living room and just chatting. Godson was about 3 years old at the time. He was just kind of playing off what his father and I discussed. And I noticed this moment where my godson's attention becomes very, very fixed at the end of the coffee table. And I look over, and at the end of the coffee table is his father's wallet. And sticking out of that wallet is a $100 bill. And slowly I watch as this sneaky little 3-year-old makes their way toward the $100 bill. I'm a fan of money, and so my immediate reaction is like, let's knock the kid over, grab the $100, and be done with it. But that's not what his father does. And in a moment of wisdom that still gathers me to this day, is why I tell the story, is what his father does is he steps around the corner into the kitchen, grabs a slice of cake on a plate, and sets that slice of cake on the other end of the coffee table. Now, this 3-year-old has an important life choice to make. Do I want the $100 bill or do I want cake? All right, brothers and sisters, what did the 3-year-old choose? Well, of course he chose cake. Why did he choose cake? Talk to me. Why did he choose cake? He can eat it, instant gratification. Why did the 3-year-old choose cake? Sugar. The 3-year-old knows what to do with sugar. 3-year-old don't know what to do with Benjamin. But he knows what to do with sugar. Why did the 3-year-old choose cake? It's prettier. It tastes better. I don't know if you're out here licking $100 bills, but I'll take your word for it that yes, the cake probably tastes better. He's had it before. He knows what to do with cake. He has experience with cake. Doesn't really have experience with a $100 bill. There's a basic underlying need, and I know how to meet that need with a cake. I don't know how to meet that need with a $100 bill. To the wisdom available to a 3-year-old, when confronted with a single slice of Costco cake and a $100 bill, that the wisdom available to a 3-year-old, cake makes all the sense in the world. But I suspect to most of us, we would never choose the slice of cake. Certainly, we'd run the math, we'd do the science, we'd figure out, let's see, how many slices of cake could I purchase with a $100 bill, and then how much would I have left over, and I still got some other things. I mean, with the wisdom available to us, we never choose cake. But with the wisdom available to a 3-year-old, cake makes a lot of sense. Incentives matter, but the context around those incentives matters as well. I think about this nowadays as I reflect on school boards and why are school board members behaving in the way that school board members are behaving. And what I begin to notice is that there is that which has lasting value, and then there is that which is short-lived, temporary. And that when confronted with these two, often I witness school board members engaging with the wisdom available to a 3-year-old. Rather than choosing that which has lasting value on behalf of the students they serve, I see them choosing cake. I want to talk a little bit about why I think school board members are choosing cake and what can be done about that and how we can partner on that. But it's important to understand that this is not, I don't offer this as an indictment of who they are. That's not what it is. As I work with school board members all across the country, it's very clear to me that we have a bunch of folks who are deeply invested in what's possible for children and want to see great things for the children of their community. But in that context, they're still choosing cake. And we've got to unpack why that is and what can be done about it. I think part of the challenge is the training is absolutely deplorable. My team and I conducted a study. We looked at all 50 states, plus Puerto Rico and DC, to try to figure out what is the training that's expected of school board members. What is it that they're expected to know and be able to do as it relates to them serving in that role? And as we looked across all of the states, what we found is that there are only 4 where anything around improving student outcomes was even required, mentioned as part of their job description in statute, or required in statute of them to receive training around. The training is absolutely deplorable. And that when you really analyze what training they're receiving, a lot of that training is around how not to go to jail. So meaningful topics. Don't do this and you won't go to jail. Don't do this and you won't go to jail. Don't do this and you won't get recalled. There's a lot of very valuable topics, and I want people to follow open meetings laws. That's important to me as well. But if we do all of those things perfectly, little AJ still ain't gonna be able to read. Like, it's not actually centering us in what is it that's necessary to improve student outcomes. And so in the context of this, as a board member, I'm confronted with that with lasting value and that which seems like it makes the most sense because this is what I've been taught, like here's the thing to focus on. Instead of focusing on student outcomes, I'm focusing on adult inputs. What are the things I'm supposed to do? I'm supposed to do this, I'm not supposed to do that, I'm supposed to do this, I'm not supposed to do that. But none of that training is actually about how we're improving student outcomes. I think we've created cake eaters. I don't think that was our intention, but I think that's what we've created. The training's not just bad with state statute. The training's also bad with school board serving organizations. Another study that my team and I conducted is we analyzed 3 years worth of conference already. You're in a conference right now, so imagine opening up the brochure and grabbing the text of every single session. That's what we did for 3 years worth of school board. Is like 2 weeks of my life I will never get back. It's a horrible study, horrible study. But we coded every single one of these. Anybody who've ever done a lot of coding work, you know how bad this can be. At the end of it, what we were coding for was what is the topic that the sessions are about. And what we found is just, I think it was just under 900 sessions total that we coded. What we found is that less than 4% of those had anything to do with improving student outcomes. A lot of these sessions too, just like the statutorily required ones, are all around what should the adults be doing or not doing, particularly a lot of what adults should not be doing. There is a whole lot of them were around things that school systems should buy. And we got really curious, like, why so many of these seem to be sales jobs for school board members? And so we actually went back and we coded a second time. You thought the first coding was bad. We coded a second time, but this time what we coded for, who is the main presenter? Any guesses who the largest group of presenters were? Vendors, 40% of the time. 40% of the time that the vendors that were the ones leading the workshops. It can't be particularly surprising then that if I sell asphalt, that I'm going to tell you, hey, look, what you really need to do if you want children to learn how to read is you need to re-asphalt the junior high parking lot. Literacy. It seems ridiculous and absurd to us sitting here now, but this is what the data suggests, is that you can spend your entire term as a school board member, and the two places that you would think would lead you in the direction of focusing on student outcomes, either your state statutory framework or your school board serving institutions whose conferences you attend, you would think that they would lead you on the path, but in fact, they lead you to a very different path. There's an epidemic in school board land, and that we've become school boards that are focused on adult inputs. What are the adults doing and not doing? And who's getting a contract and who's not getting a contract? And who got hired and who didn't get hired? I hear board members, I'm gonna get elected. I'm gonna show you how to fire this coach. Like, I'm gonna make sure Ray and them get a contract. And these are the things that is the focus, but so many of the incentives align with these things being the focus. It's possible to spend an entire term on the school board and never actually get around to focusing on, are we creating children who are problem solvers, critical thinkers, more literate, more numerate, more able to live a choice-filled life on their own terms that exceeds in creating liberation rather than bondage? That's not what we're creating. But I think we fail to create that because so many of the systems that are in place make it easier to choose cake rather than something with lasting value. I think there's another problem at the heart of all this as well, though, is that in the absence of clarity around which set of behaviors would make the biggest difference for improving student outcomes, in the absence of having a clear-eyed vision of here's what I could be doing that could be most transformative in the lives of the students I serve, what happens is the loudest voice wins. And if anybody who's paid any attention to these type of phenomenon, you quickly get a sense the loudest voice is rarely the voice of those with the greatest need. That what happens, I served 8 years on my elected board, and the people knocking on my door the most were often the most affluent parents in my school system. And they had needs, and their children had needs, and I'm not discounting that, because I know I'm talking to those people right now. What I'm saying is, if my behavior is guided by the people who I hear from the most, what I'm creating is a twofold problem. One, what I'm doing is I am calibrating my behavior as a policy leader around the needs of those who have the greatest access to me, which tends to be those who are the greatest privilege in my community. The second problem, I think that is even more cancerous in our school systems, is that what's happening is I'm creating a school system that does not cause priority to be placed on the needs of children, but instead to be placed on the access of adults. If I'm a teacher, I've got 25 students in my classroom and 5 of them are significantly behind the other 20. A reasonable thing I might do as a teacher is like, what can I do? I'm gonna have to spend some additional time with those 5 to figure out how do I get them up to where they need to be. And so I'm gonna make decisions about how I prioritize my time as a teacher, but mindful of what are the additional needs of those 5. But let a school board member show up and be like, hey, my girl Sarah, her kid is in your class and she's not happy about what's happening. You need to take care of Sarah's kid. Okay, great. As a teacher, now who am I going to prioritize? Well, of course I am, because the school board member showed up. And I don't know what you do, but when your boss walks in the room, do you act a little bit differently sometimes? But what happens is that we create a school system where what we are calibrating for is the influence of adults rather than the needs of children. All of this lives inside of adult behavior. And all of this is leverageable. If there was a different path that we could set folks on, all of this is repairable. But in order to get there, we actually have to have a better understanding of which behaviors actually would. And I think it's going to be challenging to convince board members, hey, go out and do this different thing that is disconnected from what it took for you to win. Because that's part of the inherent disconnect here is that the skill set necessary to win election is very different than the skill set necessary to govern effectively. Elections do not select for competence. That is not inherent in the design of democracy. They select for who can get elected. And I know this because I got elected twice. And if you looked at, and I think very well of myself, I have excellent self-esteem, but I got to tell you, if you were looking for who were the 9 most competent people in the city when I got elected, I would not make that list. If you were looking for who were the 90 most, I would not have made that. Who were the 900 most competent people in the city of 1 million folks? I promise you I would not have been on that list. If you said, here are the 9,000, maybe I make the cut. It's only by the grace of God that I managed to find a path that led to understanding that the things that got me there weren't going to be the things that would actually allow me to serve students effectively. But that is a roll of dice, friends. That is not what we want our school systems and our children relying upon. This is the challenge that we face, is that we actually incentivize cake eating. And we do it by not having crystal clarity around what does it take for school board members, what are the specific behaviors of them individually and collectively that have the largest leverage impact on improving the student outcomes. And to be clear, I coach school boards all day, every day, and so I certainly have ideas that I think make the most sense, and those ideas are certainly grounded in the available evidence. But I want to suggest to you right now, if we're being real, that evidence is really, really weak. Not because the scientists, the folks who put it together were looking, but because I suspect in a lot of ways I may be speaking to an August gathering of cake eaters as well. Your incentives aren't particularly aligned well for this job either. Well, what would really make the most sense is that you'd have a bunch of researchers who would sit down and say, hey, what are the greatest needs that children have, and how can we make that happen, and where can we do some more science around that? But I suspect that's probably not how you picked your dissertation thesis. Instead, what often happens is, well, where are the resources? What data sets already exist that I can leverage and I can build upon? Well, what is my, whoever's, professor who I have the strongest relationship, what are they doing, or what's their guidance? Oh, okay, they're gonna let me, be a co-PI. And I get how we get here. I get that there is a pathway that says, oh, well, we've actually got to publish, and inside of that publication that we have to make sure that there's certain things that are meaningful and that it's not a null result, and that I understand how we get here. I just suggest to you it's cake eating of the highest form. This isn't creating lasting value in the way that it could if the mission was, what's the challenge that is befalling our children, and how do we lean into that challenge? Even if it doesn't result, even if it isn't honored, even if it isn't congratulated, even if it doesn't involve me getting recognized at the podium. I understand that you've got mouths to feed as well. I understand that you've got a career to build as well. My reaction to all of that is I've watched the same behavior at the coffee table for all the same reasons. That being said, I think there is a path forward that tries to figure out how do we thread the needle on all of this? How do we figure out a way to live inside of the realities that school board members face? It has them engaged in cake eating activity. How do we have the path that lives inside the reality that researchers face that has you engaged in cake eating activity? A few of those you're already familiar with, and I just want to reiterate those. I want to try to shoot my shot. I served on the school board in Kansas City, so when I saw Kelsey and Taylor kind of being beautiful on the screen, I was like, that brother, he tried to shoot his shot and see how it's going to work out for him. Well, I'm here today to be Travis Kelsey. I'm going to try to shoot my shot with y'all as well. Well, what I hope that you'll take away from this is that there are opportunities, and that they're probably not always going to be the ones that are the ones most readily in front of you, the easiest to grab, the easiest to instantly capture value on. But if you're willing to put in the time, know that I am, that I'm willing to put my resources where my mouth is. I'm willing to put my time. I'm willing to put my own personal dollars where my mouth is. Like whatever it takes to try to figure out what are the behaviors that can actually help leverage the most benefit for the children that school boards serve. And to be clear, across the nation, like 90+% of our children are currently educated inside of public school districts. Like if we're going to be transformative in the lives of children, particularly our neediest children, they are disproportionately, overwhelmingly being served by public school districts across the nation. So some things that we can do. There are some real opportunities already being leveraged out here. So some folks are already involved in research, practice partnerships. My encouragement is certainly look for more of those. Look for opportunities to be involved in that. But in addition to that, look for innovative ways to start new ones if they don't already exist. Feel free to contact me or contact other practitioners. Or if what you have available to you is, I know no one in this arena, then now you know me, contact me and say, hey, I'm curious about the folks in Baltimore. I'm curious about the folks in San Antonio. I'm curious about the folks in San Diego. Like, let me know what you're looking for, and I will gladly help connect the dots with the research leaders or with the practitioner leaders in those particular areas. Like, don't be bashful about trying to dream outside of what is directly in front of you on the table. Consider that if you have some greater idea, let's swing for it together. Let's figure it out. Let's connect the dots on what it might take. It may be a complete waste of your time. It may be transformative in the lives of children. You don't know until you try. I'd also encourage you in your writing work, maybe grab a practitioner. I realize that a lot of the writing that I see, and I read a lot of the work from researchers, I love to be informed by the work you're doing. But when I look at it, I see it's a lot of researchers doing research with one another, which is valuable. But I'd encourage you, ask yourself, how much is it going to hurt if we find a practitioner and layer them into this process as well to try to figure out how can some of our research perspective be informed by what is happening in the lives of the people who are having to implement our research day after day. Find practitioners and see how you can bring them in. One of the other reasons I think that writing with practitioners is so huge is because a lot of school board members don't have any type of educational background, none whatsoever, and they actually don't need to. This isn't a call for that. But it's to recognize that they just don't. And so I find a lot of school board members aren't very impressed with or heavily respond to research. One, because the stuff that you write for each other is largely indecipherable to the layperson. And so it doesn't surprise me that they're not reading it. But then if it's a world that is completely separated from the world that they know, it doesn't surprise me that they have a hard time trusting it. But pull somebody in, not because they're an academic wizard, but because they're not. And say, what does this look like to you? And how can we make this coherent? How can we make this sense? How can you be a part of this writing team to help us build this thing out? My sense is that the more that school board members are involved in the research process, the more likely they are to trust the research process. Right now, as I was joking, with some of your colleagues beforehand, I was visiting with another friend recently, and she told me that the research to practice implementation loop, in the medical field is something like 17 years. But we can tighten that loop. But I don't know that we can tighten it if we aren't bringing practitioners more into the fold, if we aren't actively looking for ways to include school board members in the work that's being researched around them. The other thing I would push for is that we've got to be a lot more aggressive around what is the quality of the research we're doing. And again, I don't say this to be harmful or negative or anything of that nature. What I'm suggesting to you is that a lot of the research that is about school boards out there right now, when you really get to the methods section of it, what we're seeing is, I sent out a survey to 100 school board members, 25 responded, and so I built some type of correlational analysis based on that. That is the best we have, and it has gotten us to where we are, and so I stand on that. But I would like to stand on something more firm. To put it bluntly, I find most of the research around school boards to be largely very weak in nature. That it's hard to feel super comfortable. I stand on it because I must, because I'd rather stand on it than stand on nothing, but I'd rather stand on something stronger, and you can make that happen. But in order to get there, though, I recognize, however, that we've got to have better ways of getting access to the type of data you need. One example of this is I'm a collaborator with a research initiative. We call it the Effective School Boards Initiative. And it's a handful of researchers who got together, and I'm the kind of the token practitioner of the group. And what we're looking at is what would it take to actually enhance the quality of research into school board governance. And what we arrived at is that one of the things that holds folks back is that it's just really hard to collect. So one, for some reason, they don't let us do random controlled trials with who serves on school boards. I don't know why. Just figure that one out. And so there's some inherent difficulties. Definitely, I get that. But what I noticed and what we started talking about is a lot of these meetings are public. And so what would it take to capture these meetings and code these board meetings? Thousands and thousands of hours of board meetings. I understand why a lot of people aren't going to do that. And so we took it on as an initiative, as the Effective School Boards Initiative, to start the process of coding this ourselves, of coding school board meetings from all across the nation. We have criteria, we have a frequency of which I need to code. There's a whole inter-rater reliability protocol that we're trying to observe, all of those things. We built out a coding instrument over the course of, it took us the better part of a year and a half to really finalize the coding instrument. I led the team that built the software so that the coders log into, and so the video pops right up and they can code it right there in the software development. So all this was done, just without any external funding. All the additional expenses of all the software and all of that I've absorbed myself as a way of getting the thing moving in advance of being able to now, we're finally in a position to try to pursue some type of grant funding or something to really escalate this thing. I mention that is because if what's holding you back is, man, I just don't know where to start, how to get access to data, sometimes you just gotta sit down with some colleagues and figure out, let's create it ourselves. Our intention with the Effective School Board Initiative is we want to, as we code all this data, make it freely available in a repository so that any researchers can access it, so that other folks can come to their own conclusions, conduct their own science using this. Instead of having to rely on, I got feedback from surveys from 25 random elected officials in Wisconsin. Instead, this is something I actually have coded data for school boards all across the nation that I can pull on. I can actually look at what did they talk about? How much time did they spend on the various things they talked about? Who was present and who wasn't present? These are all really intriguing data points that get captured in our coding instrument, and the intention to be made available freely to all of y'all. This just came up because a group of researchers and I just sat down and began to imagine what's possible with no funding, nothing else. We just said we want to create something that's available for folks that can actually move the needle. What I'm suggesting to you is that what we've done is not in any way unique or special. That this could be any of our story, and that if you want it to be your story, contact me. If I'm the right partner, great. But if not, I can almost guarantee you I can connect you with an organization or a group of practitioners who can actually help you identify how to take your ideas around the science of what is it that lives in the behavior of school boards that can make the biggest impact on students and bring that into some form of reality. I'm not suggesting to you that it's the easy path. It's not. To actually capture the value of the $100 bill takes some real work beyond just biting it. But what I am suggesting is that there is latent possibility out there, and it's waiting for some of you all to step forward and grasp. And what I'm further suggesting is that the absence of us finding a way to do so, then what we give our students over to is the world that we have now. A world that does not prioritize children whose parents have less access to influence, that does not prioritize children whose families have less access to wealth. That is the system that we have now. That's the way the incentives are aligned now. And absent a stronger research base, I don't see any compelling reason to suspect that that would change. Now, all of that said, what I did promise, I wanted to open the floor to have this be more of a dialogue. I've laid out my arguments for where I think we're at, how I think we got here. As I said, the research that I've based a lot of this on isn't as strong as I'd like it to be. And so what I want to do is I want to open the floor to have a conversation about this. We've got plenty of time. We're not in a rush. But I really want to hear from you kind of what questions come up for you as you hear some of the things that I put forth. And what are opportunities that you think make sense, whether you as an individual researcher or as an organization can really begin to pursue to make a meaningful difference. What I can tell you is I have access to a vast collection of school board coaches across the country who work for me and help guide school boards all across the country. I have vast access to school boards and superintendents. And with that access, most of the large urban serving school districts have a research department. And I'm happy to help be a broker to connect the dots to help ease a path. But what I'm really excited about is actually none of those things. I'm excited about you getting creative around what is the research in this area that I'd love to do, whether that research currently exists in any number of areas around education. If you're already looking at K-12, great, then let's talk about how we can lean into that. Or maybe you're looking at pre-K or 0 to 5, great, let's talk about how we can lean into that. What has really soured a lot of education funders is that they've spent millions of dollars on programmatic areas only to have the school board change over, not be in any way invested in what they're doing, and go an entirely different direction. And all of those resources and all the science that was starting to be built on top of it completely wasted. And like, there is something in this conversation for everyone in the room. Like, what you are doing can be, whichever part of education you're touching, but if it's anywhere from birth to high school, can be positively impacted by school boards being more effective in the work that they're doing. And so I want to open up the floor for a conversation. I want to, get some, and then I've got a few ideas to close out with as our time starts to run down. But before we get into that, the floor is open. What questions do you have? Yeah, what's on your mind? And if we've got a second microphone to help, that'll probably speed things up.
Hi, my name is Saroja. I'm the auntie of Free Black Children. And I want to thank you for your talk today. First, it's been very enlightening what you've been sharing. And I really appreciated the observation you made about elections. That elections, I can't remember your exact words, but like, we're not like identifying competency through elections, right?
Yeah.
And this idea that what it takes for folks on school boards to get elected isn't necessarily the set of competencies that's going to drive and lead to positive, improved student outcomes.
That's correct.
So I'm going to let the researchers have the conversation with you about the research agenda. I want to bring the 3-year-old wisdom to this observation and ask you this question. If electing school board officials isn't necessarily the right approach for getting the people we need with the competencies to make things different for kids in schools, then how do we change that system? Why are we electing school board members? Why don't they have to apply for the job like others that we want with competence would do?
Yeah, This is a really important question. To get at the heart of this question, you first need to understand what is the job of a school board. And so a lot of people have no idea what a school board does. I certainly didn't before I got on mine. After I got on mine, I wasn't particularly clear on what we did. School systems exist for one reason and one reason only. The only reason school systems exist is to improve student outcomes, to cause improvements in what children know and are able to do so they can live lives of choice on their own terms. This is the only reason school systems exist, to cause improvements in what students know and are able to do, to improve student outcomes. This is the only reason school systems exist. The problem that we run into is that as communities get to a certain size, you can no longer have all of the parents and all the community members sitting around a table making a decision around what values should be honored in our school system and what student outcomes should be most the focus. What should our vision be? After you reach a certain size, you can't fit everyone around the table to have that conversation. So somebody got clever and said, oh, well, I know we could solve for this. We should hire a group of people in the community. We shouldn't pay them anything. And the whole purpose of hiring those people should be to have them represent our vision and our values on our behalf as it relates to the administration of things happening in the school system. And we today refer to this unlucky host of individuals as the school board. What this reveals is that the job of the school board is one thing and one thing only. It is to represent the vision and values of the community. That is it. There is no other job for the school board. The one job of the school board is to represent the vision and values of the community. This is the only expertise that they need to cultivate. This is the only expertise that is required for them to be effective. If you can represent the vision and values of the community, you've got it. If you are unwilling or unable to do that, this is the wrong place for you. And so often people think, oh, what we need is we need more educators on the school board. Actually, I don't see any evidence to suggest that's the case. Oh, we need more attorneys. That's definitely not the answer. We need more finance people because they can understand the finances. We need operations people because they can, and none of these things seem to be borne out in any of the literature that I've read. But the reason behind that is because none of that's the job. We're not hiring school boards to be education experts. We're hiring them to be experts in the vision and values of the community. The problem is we haven't come up with a better way of ascertaining what is the vision and value of the community than letting the community members go out and select a representative for themselves. And so what people are doing when they go to the ballot box is they're saying, which of these candidates do I think most represents my particular vision and values? They're not saying, which of these candidates do I think has the most educational acumen? We're not selecting for that. And so we're not getting that. Or oftentimes we're getting people who think that that's what they were elected to do, and that's really not what they're elected to do. And so if you have another strategy for how do we best identify the group of individuals who can represent the vision and values of the community in elections, then I say pick that. I just don't know that have we found better ways to hire for content knowledge around education, instruction, around finance, around all these things? Yes. But have we found a better way to identify who can best represent the vision and values of the community than someone who is elected, appointing them, or them being directly elected by a public? I don't know that we found a better path for that. But to be clear, if we find a better path to that, I'm game. What is problematic is when people think that the job of the board is to be the educational expert. That is not their job. Boards who represent the vision and values of the community hire for someone who is an educational expert. We refer to that person as a superintendent. They go by a bunch of titles, directors of schools, all kinds of stuff. But there's a chief executive for each school system. It is the expectation that person is an educational expert. But here too actually points out another area of failure for boards, is that anybody have an idea of what is the most likely path to being a superintendent, kind of career path? High school principal. What's the most likely path to being a high school principal? High school, coach, athletic coach. And so at one point, I think something in the neighborhood of like 70+% of superintendents had been an athletic coach at some point in their career. But this too is problematic, but I think it arises from the previous failures that we've talked about in school board governance. But I don't think those failures are cured by having a different way of arriving at the board members. I think they're cured by having the board members behave differently when they arrive. But again, if we could find a different way that was more effective way at calibrating for what is the vision and values of this community and hand selecting the individuals who are most effective at representing that than elections, then I have no problem with that. I say go for it. I just don't know what that better way is. For selecting competence and implementation of the community's vision and values, there is clearly a better way. But selecting for representation of the community's vision and values, I don't know. If my insight on this is accurate, then what that leaves us with is we're going to have a super suboptimal way of selecting school board members because it's still the best of all the options available to us. That means the task has to shift to how do we get folks once elected to engage in behaviors that are most correlated with improvements in student outcomes. Is that responsive to your inquiry? What other questions do you have? Yeah.
Is this on? Hi, my name is Beth, and I think you just asked my question. Because a lot of the work that I'm doing, we're thinking about how to scale evidence-based practices, little p, right? And some of the practices and behaviors you're talking about are like big picture, but how do you think about scaling? You've got to have seen examples, use cases where school boards are actually maybe doing it right and focusing on student outcomes. What is the pathway to scaling that sort of effective practice?
Yeah, the biggest problem I see with scaling is humans. Like we just have fewer of them involved. Things would work out better for us. What I mean by this is, in my last district, we had so many schools that there is no way to fit all of the principals around one table. So if we had a clear instructional vision that we want all of our principals to know about, I couldn't fit them all around the table. It was just harder to have an intimate dialogue with all of them. In my current district, I got 10 buildings. I got 10 principals. I can fit them all around a conference table. I know because I do on a regular basis. And so I could actually have a clear, direct, and intimate conversation with that small group of them about what is the instructional vision. You know, one of the things that we changed since I've arrived at DeSoto is our expectation is that 60% of our principals' time, when children are in the building, we expect 60% of the principal's time to be in a classroom supporting instruction. That has been a huge cultural shift that if I got 10 people to make that shift with, we can make magic happen, quick. But give me 100 principals and now I've got a problem. That is what I hear when I get asked questions about scale. The problem is humans. When there are so many of them in a system, it is difficult to take an idea and to really have a deep, meaningful, and repetitive, intimate conversation about that idea such that we all get into alignment. And when I think about it, because you can't extract issues of scale from issues of alignment. So let me clarify what I mean by that. When I think of the issue of alignment, when I imagine a canoe, and I imagine that there are 10 of us in the canoe, and if we're all rowing in the same direction with the same angle of attack and the same pacing, we move very quickly. But let the front half row that direction, the back half row that direction, the likelihood that we get to any destination that all 10 of us intend diminishes rapidly. And then, these two are doing that, those two are doing that. And the more we splinter, the less we have alignment in execution. And that lack of alignment obliterates any chances for scaling whatever we're trying to execute. Like if we can get all 10 of us rowing like this, then it's a whole lot easier to say to the next canoe over, hey, look, you get all 10 of you rowing like this and you'll be able to move as fast as we can. But if everybody's in this canoe is rowing different directions, any guidance we have to that canoe on how to row ain't gonna work out either. This is the relationship I've seen between alignment and organizational implementation and scaling and organizational implementation. And this is why I say the problem is people, is that the larger the organization gets, it gets harder to maintain alignment, which makes it harder to actually scale. And so the challenge that school boards can impact in this topic, the best evidence that I've found is longevity. There seems to be in the literature some type of relationship between the longevity of the superintendent, essentially the chief executive officer, the chief implementation officer, and the ability of the organization to attain alignment, which then seems to have a corresponding impact on the ability of the organization to scale. And the board's behavior does clearly have a direct impact on the likelihood of longevity of the superintendent, the chief executive. And so when boards behave in a way that is intensely focused on a specific objective, where they say, yo, here's what we want to accomplish and here that all of us are aligning around, then it makes it a lot easier to actually have a superintendent over time. If the board 1 week says we're going this direction and the next week says we're going that direction, and the next week, then it becomes very easy to be dissatisfied with the chief executive who can't possibly keep up with that. That becomes a recipe for turnover. There's a reason in our large urban districts, 18 months, for the last 3 decades, about 18 months has been the standard term. It's why you also start to look at the cohort of large urban districts that have significantly outperformed others, and frequently you'll find that there's a correlation with them having a longer tenure of superintendencies. It's obviously that's not perfect, but it tends to be the case if we actually have a vision that we want to scale. If we can't achieve alignment, then we're not going to achieve scale. And if we can't achieve longevity of executive, or at least a continuity of executive, when I think of continuity, I think of places like Orange County, Florida. They had a superintendent who developed a deputy superintendent. And then when that superintendent left, the board did a national search and selected a deputy superintendent, and they just kept going the direction they've been going. And then she developed a deputy superintendent. She just retired last year. The board did a national search and selected a deputy superintendent. They have essentially strung together roughly 20 years of we're going in one direction. Another large urban district that's pulled that off that comes to mind is Long Beach. Same thing. I think they had one superintendent for 17 years and then 12 years. And now the lady who was the chief academic officer has been selected as the superintendent. She's in year 3. My guess is she'll probably make it at minimum to year 10 and probably 15 if she feels like it. And so it wouldn't surprise me if I saw stronger ability to scale initiatives at school districts like those, that school districts where every 18 months there's a vacuum of power and everybody is scrambling to figure out where their role in the new power structure lands. This is the direct relationship I see between effective governance work and the ability to actually scale interventions that you all identified that make sense, but it doesn't matter how much sense they make. If you can't scale them, then they're actually not going to have an impact in the way that the evidence suggests that they could. It also completely is disruptive of evidence gathering to start and stop and start and stop. I've experienced this myself. I mean, this horrible pandemic came along and disrupted some really great data that I was gathering. It's like, man, but we were looking so good, and now I'll never know how we might have looked. We have to essentially start that data capture all over, and like, this next round of data probably won't be as good. That start and stop usually is fully within our control, and it lives in the board's work and its impact on the continuity of executive leadership. Where's that microphone at? Yeah.
Hi. Oh, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Ashley. I'm over here.
Hey, there you are.
I'm Ashley. I'm a practitioner scholar. I'm in the 0 to 3 pre-K and out of school time space. I wanted to.
Thank you.
I wanted to affirm your conversation on bringing in practitioners, because I've been in practitioner convenings, I've been in scholar convenings, and while there's conversation on projects and studies, there hasn't been on practitioners in the writing space. So thank you for that. But I wanted to see if you had advice for practitioners who wanted to seek out those practitioner research projects.
Push for open science.
Okay.
I don't know how much that offends folks in the room, but as a practitioner, my sense is that the more that we adhere to the tenets of open science, the greater the likelihood that what we come back with is actually going to be meaningful, that we avoid any temptations, that it's going to be a lot easier for me as a practitioner than take whatever we come up with, whatever it is, because we've pre-registered everything, so whatever comes back is what comes back. But my sense is that one of the special things that we could do is kind of outsiders coming into the academy is insist on open science and say, look, this is a prerequisite of my meaningful participation, because I don't need to be involved in the politics of the academy. Like that would be a dishonoring of my time as a practitioner. And I think not only then does that put you in a place of clarity about your participation, but it also clarifies what you are expecting from the partnership. That this isn't going to be, that we aren't going to partner around what your needs are and whatever p-hackery you can invent. That what we're partnering around is what is the science of possibility for our 0 to 3-year-olds, and wherever the data leads, it leads. It gotta be clear, folks. I spend all day, every day working either with students or with educators or with education leaders, and I have some very deeply held beliefs around what I believe works, what behaviors I believe make the biggest difference. But I would love nothing more than to engage in research that identifies that what I have spent the last 10 years of my life preaching ardently is absolutely false, and identify what is true, and for me to pivot to that. I have no qualms whatsoever going back to people, hey, you know all this stuff that I've been saying for the last 5 years with y'all? Yeah, that was wrong. And here's what we need to do instead, and here's the evidence that backs that up. But if we as practitioners don't bring that level of pragmatism, then I think it might be easy for it to be lacking. I think we can be a voice for it. And I think for the folks who are looking for that, who already have an energy, an affinity for a vision toward open science, I think that we would then naturally certainly gravitate those folks, but I think those folks will naturally gravitate to us because they understand the seriousness of our intention. That it's not about proving that my idea is the rightest, which I would like to be right. It's about proving which idea is going to make the biggest difference in the lives of children, and that is going to be our North Star. And so I just strongly encourage practitioners, even if you have no idea what the words mean, insist on, hey, can we adhere to open science principles in this collaboration? And I think as a practitioner, that will help sort away from folks whose incentive alignment actually differs from your own. And again, I understand that I run the risk of offending people in the room, but my interest as a practitioner is not your greatness as a researcher. And we should just be candid about that up front. My interest is in how do we create something great on behalf of the students we serve. I realize that's not exactly the question you asked, but I hope that's in some way responsive to your inquiry.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm Camille, and you talked about a tool for coding school board meetings.
Yeah.
Is that something that you have completed, creating like a code book and stuff for?
Yep.
Or is
Go to effectiveschoolboards.org.
Yes. Thank you. That's it.
Hey, folks, instant gratification right here. Instant gratification. That's what we do.
While I deliver this microphone to another question, I'm
That's
going to
what
make
we
an
do.
observation of something that I think will be really fun for us researchers, is to operationalize the measures, these key mechanisms that you're suggesting that are cake eating preference and lasting value orientation and the other behaviors that you want to test the relative effectiveness of. Because once we've operationalized them, we can put them into the research and test whether the ways in which they make a difference, or whether you're coaching to reduce the cake eating and increase lasting value orientation results in the things that you want. So I'm bringing it right over here. Patricia.
Thank you. Hi. I love the ideas that you've put forth about partnerships. My question is, how do we break into the space where we have the board's ears? You know, how do we get them to listen to that research? How do we, for example, break into the spaces where they get educated? Let's say, you know, those conferences that are mostly dominated by vendors. How do we, as evidence gatherers, as a community, can break into that more?
Yeah, this is one of the areas where I don't think you build a new house, you know, with the master's old tools. I think you've got to select your own tools and build your own house, separate from what's come before. I don't see a path to breaking in to these conferences that are vendor dominated. There's a system of incentive there that I don't think we touch. And the incentive structure, in case I need to spell it out, is pretty clear. The vendors pay us money and then we give them board members to sell stuff to. You and I are not affluent enough to disrupt that. So I don't think there's any way that we build the house that we want with that particular tool set. I think we'd have to build something entirely different. And in fairness, I see examples of this happening throughout the academy where folks are saying, yeah, you know what? We're now going to push for open science tenets. We're going to push for the publication of no results. We're going to do all these things. Like, let's have a repository of all the stuff that didn't work, and let's honor that some way. Have a conversation with your universities and figure out how do we mix up how tenure is deployed. Like, if somebody does really, really amazing science and proves that this don't work, how do we find a way of accumulating value associated with that? Those are the areas that I would encourage you to lean into, because I think creating something entirely different than what you currently got, because unfortunately, as I said, I've run across a lot of board members who just don't have a lot of confidence in what is coming out of the scientific world, or have no familiarity with it. And I don't think any of the current tools, either in school board land or in research land, are well calibrated for what you just described. Then I think we'd have to create something else. So as I'm sitting here inventing something on stage, I could imagine that there'd be a journal that you and I get together after this, we write it up on a cocktail napkin, that is, the journal of the education researcher practitioner journal, and we only accept things that are pre-registered and that there is a collaborative writing team, a science and writing team of practitioners and researchers, and that's what we lift up and honor. I'd be willing to go out and find who are some people willing to support something of that nature. But I think something like that, school board members would actually, school board members are involved in the science behind this? Oh, well, I'm curious about wait a minute, I could be the school board member who's involved in the science behind one of these things? Oh, well, I would definitely want to read this. Don't discount the inherent narcissism of humanity. But the tools that currently exist are not designed to capture the hearts of board members. They're designed to capture the hearts of, frankly, the folks who are running higher ed into the ground. And that reality, I don't think you solve for that. I think you have to just figure out what is something else we could create that would be collaborative, that people would really resonate with. It's like, oh yeah, got it. So I see that school board members are actually involved in this, and they inform this, and they're trying to answer questions school board members care about then I think people actually read it. And I think that's certainly not just true of school board members. I think it's true of superintendents and principals and teachers and other educators as well. That the more that they are included, I think the more relevant it becomes. Would board members hear that I served as a school board member to board chair, they automatically think that means something. It doesn't actually mean what they think it means. There's a lot of idiots who served on school boards who don't know anything they're talking about with governance. But people make this assumption. And so I think we just have to capitalize on that and create new systems and new institutions that don't exist yet. And all I'm saying is, I get that is a ridiculously steep hill to climb, and if it's a hill that you want to climb, I'm willing to climb it with you. I don't see where the microphone's at. Hey, how's it going? Cheap seats in the back row, the heathens. The heathens in the room. Gotta love it.
I wanted to circle back to the idea of the elections, because I've always been really curious about the idea that school boards are elected. And there's perverse incentives in a way where most people are using that as a stepping stone to other offices.
Lower office, yes.
And I was wondering what you thought about that. We did a study in Ontario and Canada, so I know same, different. And we found that the school board members who went on to different elected things did a lot of pretty things for the school. So they painted them, they put new sod in, they did
we got a new
stuff.
New
playground, which is not a bad thing. And then the ones that were just a school board member did not run for election, so it's not that they didn't make it, did more things like replace the boiler and hire different, more education aides. And I was just sort of wondering how in an election could we align the values better to the school? education system versus going on and becoming another elected
No,
official?
this is a great line of inquiry, and we definitely need more research into this particular area. The research that we have so far, there was one study that was done, and it was trying to figure out, is there any meaningful relationship between student performance and elections? And not surprisingly, most of the studies that have been done in this area all come back to the same conclusion. Of course there's not, but there are some outliers. So there's this one, and I'll have to find it because I don't have it in part of my slides, but they found that generally speaking, there's just no relationship between them. But there's one particular case where it did. And I want to say it was Virginia, but I can't remember. But then people get curious. This is what scientists do. They get super curious. Like, why is this outlier data here? Why is there seem to be a correlation here where there's not elsewhere? And what they found is that the local media, because of some interaction with the state and state accountability, and there was this whole series of stories and this whole extended media cycle for over a month about the performance of the local schools. And that was the one exception in the data set where there seemed to be some correlation between student performance and the likelihood that incumbents were retained. And that, no, student performance looked down, we're less likely to maintain the incumbents. Student performance up, we're more likely to retain the incumbents. But there seemed to be, like, the only times that outlier data showed up is when there was some huge conversation in the community specifically around performance. In the absence of that, you should expect that that's not ever going to be at the center of the conversation. In fact, in my second election, when we went back and ran the data, there were literally more people over 90 who voted in that election than people under 30. Think that one through. How many 90-year-old parents of middle schoolers do you know? And so the reality is the folks who have the deepest kind of interest, the most inherent interest in a student outcomes focused approach to elections, by and large, simply aren't voting, period. And even when they are, they're being hugely outnumbered by the 60+ crowd. And in case you didn't know, people 60 and older selected all your school boards. That is who is selecting school boards, 60 and up. Just run the data. If you can find a municipality where that's not the case, then let's look for what the anomalous confounds are, because that seems to be the reality across the nation. And so what it suggests is that there are ways to cause an inflection in both who participates in elections and in what they care about. But it seems to be that requires a very large concerted conversation in the community around student performance that does not exist in the ambient conversation in most communities. One way that we tried to reproduce this effect, and that I coach my boards on today to try to reproduce this effect, is something I call school board school. And so a long time ago, when I first ran for the school board, it was a 9-member board. It was basically me and a bunch of like octogenarians. It was not awesome. And so I was done. They were not hearing, they literally just called me the kid, like total disrespect. And so, I was like, I'm not trying to fool with y'all. And so I went back to the people who were my election team and said, look, I'm quitting. And it was this, little old black lady is like, look, I did not knock on all these doors with these old callous feet so that you could be a punk. This is how if you don't have an amazing little old black lady in your life, you are missing out on your own personal greatness. Because she turned me all around. She's like, nah, you need to come up with a new plan. My new plan was in school board school. It's like, yes, ma'am, I will not quit. I will honor the effort you put into my election. And so the new plan was school board school. I was like, I will train the community on what effective school board leadership looks like. And so we hosted our first round of school board school. And what we did is, it was so intriguing, the media started showing up to school board school. We hosted the second round and the third round. And the media kept showing up. It's like, who are all these people who are interested in learning about school boards and school board election? We want to interview people and all this stuff. It became this little miniature circus of media frenzy around that. In response to that, we saw a slight uptick in voter participation and a slight uptick in parental voter participation. And we saw folks who kind of represented a school system in decline were less likely to get reelected, and new folks were more likely to get elected. We've since reproduced this idea of school board school in a variety of cities across the country. And one of the reasons I've maintained is actually back to your question earlier, is it's actually helped create a sense of continuity, and that instead of people getting elected because they're trying to move on to the next seat, or instead of people getting elected because they're trying to fire. I remember there's this one session at school board school. I could see this guy kind of getting agitated. He's like sitting right over here with Sean sitting. He's like, "Arr." And it's like, and so I like to, stir the Kool-Aid. It's like, sir, what's on your mind? He's like, so wait a minute, you telling me that if I get on school board, I can't fire all the bad teachers who are hurting our kids? I said, no, sir, that's correct. That is not within the authority of individual school board members. You can't. He said, then why would I run for the school board? And he packs up all his stuff and he gets up and he stumps out. And I see that as a real victory for children in that moment. Because exactly the issue you lift up, we actually solved for. Because the problem is that person gets elected. That person, let's imagine we fast forward, there is no school board school. That person with their righteous anger, because they're certainly angry about the right thing. I'll give it to you. If you feel like there are teachers abusing children, like that's the appropriate thing to be righteously angry about. But this person in their righteous anger campaigns on the notion that if you elect me, I will fire all the bad teachers. Then they get elected and they quickly are told by the rest of their colleagues what?
You can't fire them.
You can't do that. In that moment, this board member has one of two choices to make. I can go back to the people who elected me. Ma'am, I know you voted for me on the premise that I was going to fire all the horrible teachers. Now that I'm on the school board, I realize I didn't actually do my homework. I didn't understand what the role of the board is, that we represent the vision and values of the community, the implementers, the superintendent. I didn't understand that. Now I'm on the board. I got to let you know that I will not be following through on what I promised you I would do. That is one option. How often does that option happen? Let me tell you what actually happens. Hey, folks, look, you voted for me. You got me on the school board to get rid of these shitty teachers, and now I'm trying to do it, and these heathens won't let me do it. We got to vote them out the next election. Who's with me? This is how it normally works out. What I would suggest to you is that the failure here is not on that gentleman's part. The failure is on ours to not create a conversation about what's possible for students and about improving student outcomes and having that be at the center of our intention as a community. The evidence does seem to suggest that if we can cause that to be the ambient conversation in our community immediately adjacent to elections, that can help bend the tide in the direction we intend. But if we do not do that, then there doesn't seem to be any other meaningful avenue to help accomplish that. And so this is a perfect example of where a lot of strategies that I've tried to deploy over the years have been directly informed by insights that have been gained from reading research and studies that have been conducted. Is I would have never imagined that if we can create that ambient conversation and sufficiently adjacent to elections, that we could actually influence the behavior of the electorate in that way. But that's not only does that seem to be what that study bore out, that has definitely been my extended experience implementing that insight over time.
So AJ, I am really sorry. I'm sorry to the audience who wants to ask you more questions because we're out of time for questions. I know you wanted a couple of moments to share some closing thoughts, but great news for all of us is that AJ is here through the conference tomorrow. So you can track him down at the reception or after a panel and ask your questions there. And I just want to thank you for being here and allowing the opportunity to close out.
One thing that I would share is that I have this little bracelet-y thing on, these little things that all the kids wear. And it, not surprisingly, you can probably guess what it says. Student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change. Part of the reason I wear it is it serves for me as a reminder that cake is always going to taste better. That it's always going to be easier to look at what somebody else is doing rather than look at my own behavior. It's always going to be easiest to make excuses about why children don't have what they deserve and to find the answers external to myself. But this idea that student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change isn't this abstract statement that lives over there. It's something that lives personally. It's what in my choices, what in my adult behaviors have to change to actually create the context for improvements in student outcomes. And so I wear this to serve as a constant reminder every time I start to get enticed by something that is sweet and delicious, but ultimately temporary. There's a lot of people I'd like to cuss out. But I don't do it, not because it would be uncouth or lack righteousness. I don't do it because it doesn't actually honor my intention, which is how do I pull people together so that we can actually lift up what's possible for children. This constant insistence that it's my choices, my adult behaviors that can make the difference is what I hope you take away from our time together, that there is a difference, that it seems so huge, but the coaching that I offer my boards is the same coaching I offer you. Don't try to solve everything. Try to solve for what is the next step. What is the next step in the direction of justice for the children who are underserved? What's the next step in the direction of academic freedom for children who are experiencing academic bondage? What's the next step in the direction of creating a system that is aligned with student outcomes rather than obsessed with a focus on adult inputs? The story I'll leave you with is this. Before I was on the school board, I was a vice president of my neighborhood association. What that basically means is whatever the little old ladies of the neighborhood tell you to do, that you run and go do. And so one particular day, Miss Johnson calls me up. Miss Johnson is, if I had to guess, probably at least 947 years old. A lot of neighborhoods have had a Miss Johnson. It's a little old lady who sits on her front porch. She sees everything. She knows you. She knows your mama. She knows your granny mama. She knows your great grandma. And so if you do anything that ain't right, she gonna tell everybody and you go catch a whooping when you get home. That is the nature of Miss Johnson. So when she calls, you know, even neighborhood vice chair, I gotta run to go do. So she calls. I show up at her front porch. She's sitting out there. It's like, what can I do for her? She says, well, we need a stop sign. I was like, all right, but I've just gone through some community organizer training, and they said that when you hear an issue, that you push on that to get to the underlying value. So I do what my community organizer training tells me to do. Well, Ms. Johnson, why is the stop sign important to you? She looks at me like I'm an idiot. It's like, no, just work with me. I'm trying to use my new community organizer training. She's like, well, it's important to me because these cars are going too fast. Well, Ms. Johnson, why is that important to you? No, just work with me. Well, it's important because these kids are out here trying to play. Well, why does that matter? Well, it's not safe. And after starting with an issue, I pushed on it, and now we get to the value underneath the issue. My job is not to represent Ms. Johnson's values. It's to represent issues. It's to represent the values. And so then I visit with the city planner. We talk through some of the circumstances. She says, oh, if you want to slow down traffic, you know, you could make it a two-way street. That'll slow it down instead of one-way. You could put speed bumps there. You could turn it into a cul-de-sac. You could do all these different things. And so we visit with some of the other people in the neighborhood, and we talk to folks, and we lift up, yeah, they're concerned about the value of safety as well. And so at the end of all of that, Travis, our city planner, she checks out the budget and figures out, hey, you know what? We're going to have a crew come next week. They're going to install a speed bump. It's going to slow the traffic down. The place is going to be safe. I go back to Ms. Johnson exuberant. Ms. Johnson, you're going to be so excited. They're going to put a speed bump there. And what does Ms. Johnson say? Baby, that is not what I asked for. Ms. Johnson in this moment calls me everything but a child of Christ. She talks real bad about me, and I leave there somewhat concerned. It's like, did I do the wrong thing? But my job is not actually to represent the wants and wishes of individual community members. My job is to represent the vision and values of the community as a whole. I did my job. I did what was expected, was required of me, even though it was not pleasing to the person directly in front of me. This is the invitation that I leave you with. As you consider what adult behavior change that I can make in my own life that would really have lasting value. Consider that there's a Miss Johnson somewhere in your institution, and the thing that you will bring forward that will lift up what is possible, the larger vision and values of our communities, doesn't always align with the stop sign that Miss Johnson wants. But providing the Ms. Johnsons of the Academy with stop signs is not our job. It is not your job. Your job that you can step into is to lift up the vision and values of a community, to make possible from the impossible, to create a day where students, their well-being isn't connected to their economic circumstances. you can change your adult behaviors in ways that can improve student outcomes. Thank you for your time.